Hello, Michael. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. I'm happy to have you here. Thanks so much for joining.
I'm delighted to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I feel a connection already between the two of us.
Yeah, I read your profile when when you reached out, and I was like, this is a perfect match. I'm glad to have you on. So yeah, I usually I start it when having my guests just give a little bit of a personal background, where they've been, where they're wanting to go, and their story.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to dive in. I'll try to be brief, but by all means, feel free to ask any questions about any piece. So, I was born and raised in a very poor family and a very abusive family, and a lot of bad stuff went down. My dad went to jail for 10 years, and I left that town a very, very angry young man. And so I go off to college, and I kind of what I call the church of hedonism. I drank like a fish, chased the ladies, not very well. I wasn't good at that. Chased the online ladies a fair bit, which turns out that's a lot easier. And trying to see if I could find my way to make that be the key to happiness. Turns out it didn't work. And as I'm going through graduate school, uh, I kind of decided, well, that's not working. I knew I wanted to have money. I knew some stuff was important in life. I knew I eventually wanted to have kids. And so I thought, well, the booze and the ladies isn't working. Let's try something else. And so I started realizing I needed to grow a bit more. I started realizing I needed to find something deeper and more meaningful in my life. And again, I'm going to do a super high level summary here. But I was gifted a tremendous number of amazing mentors in my life, men that stepped into the breach, into the gap, and said, "Hey, Michael, I see this isn't working well for you. Maybe we can talk about this. Maybe I can help." And this took place. I tell people I have the world's best boss at my first job when I graduated from. I have a PhD in chemistry, and I went off and worked for Intel. And I was gifted with this amazing boss. He was so deep, and his wisdom was so profound. And similarly, in other areas of life, again and again, these men came into my life and just poured themselves into me, oftentimes with no cost whatsoever. And it started to change who I was. And maybe, so I spent about 7 years at Intel, switched to another corporate environment, actually transitioned from the world's best boss to the world's worst boss, and then had this place in my heart to go entrepreneurial and responded about like how most people do, like, no way, that's crazy. I should never do that. And, the good Lord, I'm a man of faith, and my wife working together eventually overcame my defenses. And I went, took the dive, gave up the 6-figure income, gave up all the nice security, whatnot. And now I actually full time get to do this right here, where I get to talk to people like you, an awesome young man. I get to talk to people who are hurting really badly. We talk about ways that they can transform their lives and find happiness and meaning fulfillment in their lives as well.
So that's your full time position at the moment is helping guys go work through their problems and such,
That's
coaching.
correct.
Great, great. Yeah, I think there's definitely a movement going on. I can sense it. I'm a little bit in that world, so maybe I have just by proximity, I'm feeling it more. But I can definitely see a lot of guys are reaching out more and realizing because as a guy, there's a sentiment of no one's coming to help, right? Like you reach a certain
Right.
age, you reach a moment where you're like, okay, like it's me against the world. But then you can realize like, okay, other guys are in that same position and we can help each other out. And that's
Well,
something I never realized. So
we used to have that for all of time. That was the way it was. Because you think about it, like for all of time, people would grow up in whatever their little village was, their cluster of mud huts, but they knew each other. And oh, that's old Tom there. He's been around forever. And so occasionally old Tom would come to young whippersnapper, slap him upside the head and say, "Hey, young man, you're not doing it right." But there was this familiarity there, and there's this comfort and awareness that everyone knew each other on such a deep level that you could have that kind of connection. And we've lost all of that in our modern world. And what makes it even worse is instead of that, we've substituted this social media style interconnectedness, which bluntly I think is a little more compatible with the feminine viewpoint of life than it is with the masculine viewpoint of life. The old line I love is that women make friends face to face, men make friends side by side. And it's very
mm,
hard to be side by side in an online social media environment.
can you explain that a little bit further? So you're saying online dating in general is more geared towards the feminine?
Well, not online dating. Dating is a different scenario.
Oh,
Um, but just in terms of friendships. And so for men to have friendships, I'm not saying men can't have friendships online. Of course we can. But the
mm,
natural mechanism by which men form the deepest friendships is working together side by side. And I'll use a primitive
a
example. Like
common
maybe
goal.
yeah, or a common task even. Maybe like just recently helped a buddy of mine put a fence in. And the two of us, we had a great conversation. We're putting the fence, but we're working on something, right? And so we're there to do the thing. And that's
Mm.
very, very different. Whereas two women are quite happy to sit down and just talk over coffee and tea, looking at each other straight face to face.
It's like the typical, like, "What did you guys talk about?" "I don't know. We didn't talk about much, right? We played golf," or, like, we accomplished a task adjacent to each other. We didn't necessarily, like, learn about what's going on in each other's lives. It's definitely, a running joke at the moment.
It is, but it's also, I think, a great problem. I think the invitation is while men are working side by side, they should be talking about something important. This particular friend and I, when we talked, we spoke about our marriages and how he was doing his marriage, how I was doing my marriage, where I was coming up short, where he was coming up short.
Hmm. And was that something that you instigated, or is that something that just came up naturally? Or I guess because you have to reach a certain level of closeness with a person, especially between guys. I feel like you have to have gone through a battle together to be able to open up like that to each other. So,
You're totally right. First off, this was not our first project together, and so I should definitely qualify this that this is not my first time meeting somebody. I meet a nice young man like you, Andres, and I might be like, yeah, we can talk some real stuff, but I'm going to share the deepest fears of my heart with someone only once they've earned that, right? Because you have to put that time in, but you also have to know that's what you want to aim for. And so these days in my life, honest, I don't have time for people who want the shallow relationship. If I meet somebody new within a few minutes, I at least am sensing like, is this someone who'll become a deep friend? Or is this someone who's bluntly just not worth my time? Not that they're not a wonderful person in their own right, but I have 6 kids. I am busy trying to build this business. I don't have a lot of time for a lot of friends. And so I'm going to build the relationships that will go deep.
mm. And that's one of the things that in corporate life I realized, right? Like, there's a lot of superficial relationships, and one thing that I was quite impatient with is just small talk in general. I'm like, I don't
Hmm.
want a small talk if, like, don't tell me about the tomatoes in your garden, right? Like, tell me some real stuff. And I don't know. I'm personally the type of person that can start talking about those types of things pretty quick, not immediately, but pretty quick. And other people need more time. But yeah, I agree with you. Is my point. So it's
Well, but even there, if you just set out as a purpose, like so much about life is having a purpose and intent. And you set off with intent to build deep, powerful friendships, you're going to turn away 95% of the guys that want to have that surface level conversation. Like you're going to sift. If there's 1,000 guys at your workplace, there might be 2 to 5 that are going to be compatible with you, that you'd be comfortable having that deeper relationship. But what a priceless gem to find them. One of the things I think is really critical we need to understand as men is that men heal and grow in a very special way in the presence of other men, but they cannot do that in the presence of women. The nature of the masculine and the feminine is such that the masculine has to be order to the feminine's chaos. Now, please understand, if you're a female listener, I'm not trying to insult the feminine at all by calling it chaos. Chaos in the philosophical and the psychological speak is where all good things come from. All the gold is found in chaos. Everything we need to survive is found in chaos. The feminine is a deep, rich mystery of wonderfully good things, but the masculine is the order counterpoint to that. And here's the problem: if I, as a male, and with a woman, just the dynamics of our relationship require me to be more in the order, or I violated the natural alignment of the genders. Whereas with I'm with a man, now it's permissible for me to drift into disorder, to say, hey, look, here's where I'm really struggling. My marriage is a hot mess. I'm yelling at my wife. I'm showing up poorly. I mean, I can make up more stuff if you want. Like all this stuff that I'm doing wrong is only really safe to fully go into in the male environment where I am no longer required to be order in that particular dynamic engagement. And this is something I think a lot of people don't really grasp when they're so want to be so egalitarian and say, oh, well, men and women are the same. It's just different plumbing. Well, no, they're not actually. There's tremendous psychological and physical tests that have shown the vast complexities of differences between how the two genders operate and see the world.
hmm. Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said of um, men being able to be, or having, or men and women having the capacity to have feminine qualities and masculine qualities, right? You can,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
and guys sometimes want to be able to relax. We have a lot of, we feel responsibility towards the women in our lives. And a lot of women even come up to me and they're like, damn, I want to be able to relax into my feminine, but a lot of guys nowadays don't know how to remain in their masculine and provide that gift, if you will, to the woman in their lives. So it's definitely something that has been lost, right? Like that ability. So
It's
yeah,
been strongly
continue.
discouraged. It's beyond lost. Like it's actually been, it now is punished. The idea of toxic
Mm,
masculinity has been so twisted. And don't misunderstand, there is, of course, a toxic way to be masculine. In the same way, there's a toxic way to be feminine. You can
mhm,
go toxic in all the different directions. But I think there's been this confusion that says all or perhaps nearly all masculinity is toxic, and that's certainly not true. And because of that, so many men are afraid to really lean into that into their authentic masculinity because they're afraid of it being called toxic, even by their own internal voice. And so I totally sympathize. There's a lot of women who want to be feminine but can't find that rock, that stable platform of order to which to relax into.
Yeah, that what you said there about having your inner dialogue, like you either had a hyper masculine father, and that made you want to become the opposite because you were you saw that as toxic, or you had complete lack of masculinity in your father, and so then you become like a hyper masculine and go in the opposite direction, right? It's like a pendulum, and you need to be able to find that center, unaffected by your inner dialogue, your inner critic, and that, that internal judge that we all have within us, right?
I think I can maybe even make this a little tiny bit simpler and invite a man to look at his own emotional state. When a man is able to approach a moment in time with a place of calm and peace and confidence, he will find his way into his own authentic masculinity. When he approaches a moment in time into fear, desperation, anxiety, there's almost no chance he's going to find the proper authentic. Then he swings. He either, from his place of fear, swings to being overly masculine. We'll do this, you do this, now do
Mhm.
this, blah, blah, blah. Or he swings to the overly sensitive. Oh, I don't know. It'll all be fine. I'm sure everyone will get along just fine. When the proper one comes from this place of calm of saying, well, we're in a pickle. This is not a great spot, but here's what I think we need to do. Here's the direction we're going to go, and here's how I think it's going to work. So it's all get riled up together. Let's go. And there's a confidence there that's not coming from bravado.
Mm. And you can still receive the information from the feminine, right? Like from the woman in your life, right? You can still receive it, I guess, masticate it, and then, or process it rather, and then utilize that in continuing to lead, right? It's not, so when you say you you're overly masculine or overly aggressive about your, we're gonna do this, right? Is that what you mean? I suppose is the question.
Yeah, and let me perhaps put some other context here. It is quite normal in a male female relationship that she does the vast majority of the talking, and you have to learn how to really listen, and that's not an easy skill. But let me go a level deeper there. The average person doesn't actually necessarily want to get their way. What they really want is to be heard, to be understood, to be connected, to be part of something bigger, to feel taken care of. And so, if you really get a woman who feels understood, who feels heard, who feels connected, like feels like you're going to take care of her, she won't fight quite as hard if the final plan you choose doesn't have every single I dotted and T crossed the way she thought it should have been initially. And that's part of what it means to be an authentic masculine is to say, I hear you, I understand you, I take your input, I value your input, I will take care of you. I see this picture. We are stronger together than we're apart. And this is the direction based upon your input, based upon my input. This is the way we're going. And there are many decisions that my wife takes lead on. But the big decisions when something really comes to a head, there's she needs the masculine in the same way that I need the feminine.
Yeah, that last point is quite important. I feel like there's been a lot of devaluation of the feminine, right? There's been a, obviously feminism has pushed, um I guess the idea that there's like a patriarchy, and let's not, I don't want to get too political or anything, but my point is that they're pushing towards the masculine, and they sort of intrinsically devalue the feminine. And a lot of, I mean, men, like, we need the feminine side of things, that we crave it, we look for it. um and there's been, I think there's been devaluation of both, really, right? I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
you can say that we've discouraged masculinity, but we've, in a sense, discouraged femininity. And so then w- maybe we've ended up in these flipped roles where women are having to take on the masculine because they feel unsafe and can't relinquish that. And so then, and like I said before, like, like women have like, I don't know what it is about me, but people like to talk to people open up sort of randomly to me, and women have told me this, like, where they just like, they're stuck and they can't relax. So
Well, let
it's
me
a
maybe
sad thing
expand.
to see.
If you're open to it, I can even expand a little bit on the side of the feminine. And we need to
Please,
understand.
yeah.
Let me start with some basic psychology. There's a parameter in personality called neuroticism. It's a rough sounding word. All it really means is sensitivity to negative emotion. And if you're using this parameter, more neurotic, you're more sensitive to negative emotion. Women are significantly, on average, not all, but on average, whenever we look at distributions, we have to understand what statistics means. On average, women are more sensitive to negative emotion. Well, why would that be? The primary job for women through all of history has been caring for infants. And if you want to keep this thing that's alive, that's always struggling to die. Like if you've cared for an infant, they're so fragile, they're so need so much intensive care. You have to be very sensitive to the slightest bit of negative emotion, both in yourself and in those you're with. And because of that, women have a very sensitive feedback loop for when things aren't working right. Now, we men, by contrast, we can just sit on our big flat behinds and be quite comfortable as slowly everything burns away because we're like, well, that's good enough for now. I did my part. We're good to go. And so, a wise man living as masculine just as much needs that feminine to say, hey, look, it's an early warning indicator, but there's some stuff going wrong here. Oh, your son, he's not hearing you enough. He's not getting enough quality time with you. Your daughter, she's not seeing you role model how to care for her. And a wife with this sensitivity, with this gift of receptivity that she has, where women just receive when they live in their femininity fully, they just receive everyone fully into this maternal care and then provide this perspective to the man that he's totally blind to. And the man living as masculine may not even be aware of the needs of the wife, of the kids, of the community, that the woman just sees naturally being feminine, being open and
Mhm,
being receptive. If you think of it this way, I'm going to go just a little tiny bit theological for a second. Everything in a woman points inward. You see this genetically in the feminine genitals. Everything points inward, whereas everything in a man points outward. Women have this gift to draw in, and you see this. Women hug everyone. They can hug and pull anyone in. Men, we have this outward focus. It's hard sometimes for us to hug someone else because we're outward. We want to push ourselves out onto the world. And you need that balance. And it's not all push on the world. Sometimes it's come on in, be calm, live in the moment. This is the moment. We don't need to build the new expansion of the house, get the new promotion of the work. We need to live now
mhm.
because your kids need you now. And you're missing that. And 20 years from now, those kids will be gone. And if you're not part of their life, you will have lost that connection with them forever. And I'm just picking on kids because it's the most obvious example, but the feminine is this source of growth and newness that men need just as much.
Mm. That sort of brings to mind this idea of, um, my grandfather, he worked during the he ran a business during the day, taught university classes in the afternoon. So, my father's told me before that it was like, I barely saw him. And then I saw my father more than he saw his. And sometimes I think, when the day does come that I have children, hopefully, like, what I'm doing now, I get to see them even more. And yeah, it's a little bit of a motivation for me sometimes. It's
Absolutely.
not the complete picture, but yeah.
We men get too focused on executing performance. We get so focused because if you think about, like, you're in a soccer team, right? And it's that critical moment. The ball passes to you. You're in front of the goal. You swing your legs. At this moment, one of two things is going to happen. That ball is going to go past the goalie into the net, and you get carried home on the backs of everybody on your teammate, clapped on the shoulder. You're the hero. You won the game. Good job, buddy. Or it misses. Your team goes home in sadness and you don't get to go to the pizza party, whatever. Like the difference there is stark in the male mind. And we get so focused on this job, perform, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, as we said a second ago, what really matters is relationships and these connections.
Mhm.
And the feminine is necessary to pull us out of ourselves. Another way to say it psychologically is that women soften men. And that's very much needed.
Hmm. That's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. I never thought. So do we harden women, I
Um,
guess?
we provide a foundation for women. Let me
Okay.
use one of my favorite metaphors. So for a while, I lived in Oregon, and this Oregon coast, you have these big rocky monolith pillars, right? And the waves
Mhm.
come smashing in on the rocks. It's really quite beautiful. And the masculine's kind of like the rocks, and the feminine's kind of like the
Mm.
waves. And the rocks there, it provides order, it provides structure, it provides contrast and definition. But at the same time, the rock's getting smacked upside the face by the wave. And if you think about the poor rock's perspective for a second, I'm being a little silly, obviously. Here comes in this big old wave, bam, right in the face. You're like, whoa, I was just sitting here minding my own business. Where did this dang old wave come over, get off, smacking me upside the face for? She said, okay, okay, you know what? I'm going to figure this one. I'll let it go. Just don't do it again. Of course, 2 seconds later, another wave, bam, right in the face of the rock, right? And so there's this dance and this tension between the genders, masculinity, which is the men provide the order and the structure, the women provide the chaos, the dynamic, and the growth and the new. And there's a tension there. Each one feels uncomfortable because it's different, but each one needs the other. The waves of the rocks would never accomplish anything. And if you understand how water dynamics work, the waves with no external context, the water just circles in endless loops and never travels anywhere. And the rocks without the waves, well, what would be where's the beauty? Where's the new? Where's the dynamic? Where's the different? And
Hmm.
rocks and waves are put the merest shallowest example of the true depth and beauty of the masculine and the feminine, the dance and the interaction.
When you were explaining waves there, I could tell you were an engineer or a scientific background, I suppose.
Totally.
Yeah. So a little bit of change of pace then. I mean, now that we're already talking about your schooling and all of that, what was that mental transition that you took? Because I mean, I was an engineer and I left that behind at this point, and it was definitely a difficult thing to do. I think a lot of us, like we were saying before, like we're go go go, and oftentimes we identify ourselves with our career with like I used to think I'm an engineer. That's who I am. And it took a lot of work internally to sort of let that go and realize I can be more, I want to be more, and I want to explore a little bit more of what the world could provide for me. So,
So let's start with my story, but I want to expand a little bit what you said about the whole identity piece and how we
mhm.
identify and define who we are. So in my story, the way that I handled it bluntly was poorly. It was not an easy transition. Um,
Okay.
so it helped a little bit that I mentioned earlier that at Intel I had the world's best boss. This man was phenomenal. He just taught more about how to have relationships just by the way he acted than ever he did in words. And I remember, like, let's say there was a meeting coming up. There's a really important meeting and some big decision was going to be decided. He would go before the meeting and he would talk to every single stakeholder in that meeting, one on one in his cubicle, sometimes starting even a week beforehand, right? So when the actual meeting arrived, and it was so cute. I'm laughing as I'm remembering how this went down. Is you have the big boss, and he's like, "All right, here's the meeting. We're here to decide such and such and such." He'd look around, let each party talk. Eventually, look over at my boss. His name was Gary. He said, "All right, Gary, tell me what's going to happen here." And Gary would be like, "Well, after thinking, listening carefully, everyone else has said, I wonder about something like this." And he knew the answer because he already found out it was going to fit to everyone because he talked to everyone ahead of time. And he would just drop it in there so calmly. And people would just go, "Oh, yeah, that would work." And it was because he had these relationships. He knew how to get them to trust him, to share their real concerns and real problems going in this workplace environment. And so he was incredibly effective. Now, on the inside, what I got to see from Gary that most of them didn't see is he always tailored his solution a little bit to be in his favor for his group. And so it was just beautiful because he would come back to like, well, they agreed. As part of this gigantic change, we get to slip in this one thing we really want to do too. And we were always like, yeah. And so then I transitioned to Micron. Exactly the opposite. This guy was manipulative. He was controlling. He micromanaged. I mean, I literally built computer algorithms to hide my way. This is silicon development process. I had to hide wafers. I would literally hide my allocation under names of people who were just hired who didn't know how to search for what was allocated to them. And then I rotated it through because this boss was so bad, he would just come steal stuff and take stuff and just do whatever he wanted to with it.
Mm.
And so pretty quickly as we're going through this process, I would watch the hearts of my fellow coworkers just be crushed. And I would be like, "Ooh, let's talk about what just happened." And so I'd go to the cafe with them. We'd sit down, we just talk through it and building those relationships. I just did my best to be Gary for them. And I loved it. It's so much so, in fact, just as a kind of jumping ahead of the story a bit, after I had left my corporate environment, it was 3 years that some of those coworkers that I'd had were still contacting me to talk about what was going on for them because that relationship was so powerful. And so going through that time that was so painful with this boss, and his boss wasn't much better, but his boss was, he just was afraid to act. Different story. Um, I thought, and so that helped ease a little bit there. But I knew that I had a gift for this and I knew that I loved it. But I can tell you with confidence when you sit with somebody and help them gain a new perspective and you watch that light of joy fill their faces, they thought everything was lost. And they realized, oh no, there's a way to still make this work. There's a way that I can be, the good guy and accomplish what I want to get done and still have it turn out well. That is just so phenomenal. So I tell people I have the world's best job now. I've seen big, burly men that can, bench 400 pounds, break down sobbing in front of me as they confront some wound that they've been too afraid to look at. And just everything in between.
And do you find that helping other people has helped you? Because I one of the things that happens to me when people, like I said, just open up to me is I'm trying to listen and offer some sort of help. And I don't do this for a living like you do, but one of the things is sort of accepting where they are in their process, right? And that
Yep.
has really taught me to be a more patient person, a more accepting person. And so I guess what have you how have you changed since you started coaching?
So we tend to trust people who are similar to ourselves. This is not new. Like this has been well documented in psychology for a long time. And so what that means is that somebody who I pick up as a client tends to be someone like me, which means they tend to have similar problems that I have. And there's a number of times where either directly my wife says afterwards, "Hey, I heard what you said that to the guy that you were just talking on the call. Maybe you should think about that too, eh?" Or more commonly, because my wife's a very gracious woman, she doesn't say that almost ever, is I'll in my own voice say, "Oh, I'm saying this to this client right now. That might apply to me too." And so, by all means, you're right. Of course, when we engage in this work, we're giving insights into ourselves. But even beyond that, I think there's a gratitude that comes when you hear where someone else's story has led them and where they're at now, and use this gratitude that says, "Wow, just again, my religious background here. Praise the Lord that I didn't have that particular challenge." Because wow, that one sounds tough.
Hmm. Definitely gives you perspective of and it reduces the size of the problems that you have in your life, right? Like you can
Yes,
realize that you're not carrying half as much or even a quarter as much weight as some people have had to carry in their lives. And gratitude is definitely something that you should be aware of every day, right?
absolutely. I mean, gratitude is a game changer. It transforms the world around you. Your perspective is your reality. Jordan Peterson, who I love, said this the other day. I thought this was profoundly helpful. That speaking from a clinical psychology, that you cannot differentiate between thinking about yourself too much and depression, which means that from a functional standpoint, those two things are the same. And so many people today, and I put a little bit of blame on this that the whole self esteem movement was so twisted, whatever, that's a different story. But so many people today get so focused on thinking about themselves and their own problems and their own situation. And then they end up depressed because that those two are the same thing.
Hmm. You know, like I've thought about that. I'm quite an introspective person, and that sort of has affected me to a degree. And I've
Hmm.
realized that people that are not as introspective, they're just, I guess ignorance is bliss, right? Like you're not thinking about it so much. And if you think back, like would you say that people say 200 years ago, like they had, thinking of Jordan Peterson and how he thought, how he says our lives are much better now than they were 200 years ago, right? Like if you're on a farm working all day, you're not you're not as in your head, right? I don't know if you've ever
Right.
heard the Latin phrase like ora et labora.
Hmm.
You know, it just that I don't know, when I first heard that, it stuck in my mind, and I was like and I actually was just talking yesterday about how I love, extreme sports and things like that, and it just gets you out of your head. It's a skill to learn, right? To get out of your head.
There's nothing at all wrong with being introspective. Introspective is a very valuable skill. The danger comes that for those who are more introspective, are more introverted, and it's the reverse change of those who are extroverted, right? Like wherever you fall on the temperamental spectrum, there's always a challenge. But the danger is that you need to kick yourself in the butt to get out sometimes, whether it's extreme sports, whether it's going to a social event, whatever it is, that from time to time you just got to kick yourself in the butt to get going because then you do get to engage out of yourself. And you're totally right. 200 years ago, you're trying to make ends meet. Your family's dying of starvation, whatever. You barely got enough food, and you got some mountain lion trying to eat you. You got no time to think about how terrible your life is. You're like, "Don't eat me, mountain lion. I was just stab you the thing," right? I'm exaggerating a bit here, right? But of course, it was very different back then. It's that we have so much comfort now. But let me give one more interesting twist to this. The first time Mother Teresa arrived in the United States, she looks around and she says to someone next to her, "Wow, I have never been to such an impoverished country." And the person's shocked. They're like, "Mother, well, no offense, but what are you talking about? Like, we are the wealthiest country in the world. Why would you say that?" And she, in her Mother Teresa kind of nun like way, goes, "Oh, no, no, no. You're talking about financial prosperity. I'm talking about emotional poverty." And I think she was right, spot on, or said differently. Henry David Thoreau said, "Men live lives of quiet desperation. Women too." He just, was referring just the generic men, mankind. And
Mhm.
this lives of quiet desperation, I think, fits the modern first world human so well because we have all the material goods. We're surrounded by affluence, and we're alone, and we're alone in our thoughts in our head.
I often think that a lot of issues in the US would be resolved if everyone was forced to travel when they're 18, to go see a different perspective because we are, or in the US, we're often uh, in a bubble of sorts. I mean, nobody in the US is living above a certain, oh, I don't know what metric I could use, but I guess the poverty line if you compare to a different country, right? So
Right.
everybody is above that, and we lose perspective, and then, like we were saying, maybe we'll lose gratitude, right? And so it's and do you think this is like particularly to the US? I mean, maybe the UK, maybe Western Europe a little bit as well, but it seems like countries that are a little bit more well off have that issue.
There's a cultural element of the United States, which has always been the I'm independent. I can do it
Mhm.
myself. I don't need anybody else, which makes sense. Look at where we came from. And that's not the same thing in a lot of the other, I'll say, first world European countries. This last summer, there's one of my favorite camping trips of the year. We get a whole bunch of dads from church. We end with 10 dads and up to about 40 plus kids, and we go camping. And we just take over this huge group camping site. And this time, somebody brought along a French exchange student. She was a wonderful girl, very kind, and the whole camping trip, she was always sharing comparisons with what it was like for her growing up in rural France. And it was phenomenal to watch these kids' eyes just open. They're like, "What? You guys do
Mhm.
what? And you do what?" And she, like, at one point sang a French campfire song for us, which is kind of these sad military songs they sing because that's apparently what you sing in France, how all the military fights have been lost. I'm being a little harsh there. That was kind of a joke. But I mean, she was a wonderful young girl and she shared all these perspectives. And I could not agree more with what you're saying that the benefit of seeing the bigger picture is so helpful. I invite people that maybe you don't have the time or the money to actually travel. Great books can get you there too. Reading books that offer those different perspectives is perhaps not as powerful, but still a wonderfully good thing.
I often I hear some maybe I guess either stay-at-home moms or single moms and such saying how it can be a little bit of a lonely life,
Yes.
and I think to just maybe my childhood a little bit where um my family's from El Salvador and or Central America, and we would do these get-togethers in my grandfather's ranch, and it was like 25 or some amount of cousins. I don't know how many cousins I have, right? And so then there was always like a sense of community uh, that I would very much appreciate, and I probably wouldn't recognize had I not grown up in the US. This is when I
Hmm.
would visit, and you can tell sort of in the US where the nuclear family is more important than the extended family, and there's people that maybe just haven't seen their cousins or seen their extended family as much, and I guess my point is um, that we've sort of lost that community a little bit, and yeah, and there's benefits to it, right? Like sometimes large families can be a bit chaotic, but um, but having that community for men and for women is, I feel like, important, right? Like it's almost like there's a bit of a trend going on right now of people saying that they just want to start like a group of of homesteads that are next to each other and then just all homeschool their kids together, right?
Oh yeah.
And I'm in my head, I'm just like, well, that's a commune, but like not a
Yep.
commune, but like a, but
No, you're
basically,
right. That's the
right?
technical definition for it.
Right. It
I
has a
love the
little bit of
idea,
a
but yep,
negative
that is what
comment,
it is.
right? Yeah, it has maybe a little bit of a negative connotation, but yeah, it could be. I don't know. It could work. It could be a solution moving forward. So,
But look at the yearnings of the human heart. Humans were never meant to live in isolation. You go back again 200 years plus, 200 years to 100,000 years ago, and you wouldn't have a woman raising children. You'd have a whole community of women all raising the children next to each other. And it wouldn't just be a little boy that's, misbehaving and mom has to deal with. There'd be a whole line of women there that not only them, but there'd be a whole line of men coming back that evening when they got back from whatever hunting trip whatever they were on. They'll then back them up as well. And that community is critical. But what happened though was we all got betrayed by our communities. And sometime going through, the 20th century, the standard shifted from I've got your back no matter what, you're my community, I've got you, to you can't depend on me. I may just up and move. You don't know anymore. And hey, I'm all for moving. I'm all for seeing the world and finding opportunities. Don't misunderstand. But the subconscious message was, you can't depend upon them anymore. And so the reaction was, ooh, well, I don't want to get burned. So I'm going to pull back and live by myself because I count on myself. I can count on my family. They're there. Well, the divorce rate puts some concern there too, but that's a separate topic. But my point is to say, like, just because we all started moving and stopped depending upon our other people to be there, doesn't mean that same basic need just vanished. It's still there. I'm still desperate to have other people that I have a real connection with, not just my wife. My wife can't be everything for me. I mentioned earlier about how men need other men to heal. Women need other women to communicate with as well. I'm going to give you a hint right here. This is a pro tip. Women communicate with women differently than they communicate with men. And they can say things to women they can't say to men because the language doesn't exist. And so all of us need that support. We need the ability to say, hey, Mary, can you watch all the kids for a second? I just need to go clean this thing up. Well, because the kids just broke. And so I can't watch my littles. And so there's this I've got your back feeling that's totally lost. And there's a lot of people talking about starting some variation of a commune. I've been, discussing that as well. But while I recognize that communes have been badly abused through history, at the core of it, the cry of the human heart is, I want someone beside me. I want lots of people beside me. And that's a common theme. And I think we're seeing that leak out and express in lots of different areas, some healthy, some not, in our society right now.
And how does that mesh then with sort of the idea of empowering the individual, right? Because, taking ownership for where you are in life, where you're wanting to go, and um, it's definitely a little bit ingrained again in the American culture of the yeah, again, harping a little bit to Jordan Peterson and some of his work, like it empowering the individual is an important thing. And I do believe in it, but then I guess my question is, how does that mesh together with this need for community?
We need to be very careful to say that when we empower an individual, the goal is never to empower them towards the end of harm, right? If you go back to like the Hippocratic Oath, it's the first rule is always do no harm. And there is danger in over empowerment. Note where I'm not about to go become some radical socialist here on you. We're still living in America. But to say that I still have these basic needs, what I look at as empowerment is freeing someone to find those needs and be free to find the needs in the way they want to find them. And I think the danger on a more practical level is we can confuse individual empowerment with lack of need of other people. And those are two separate things. And I'll use a practical example. I have moved in my life now to 4 or 5 cities. And each time I, to greater or worse extent, set about to find connection with people in those cities. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten better at doing it. Not because it's actually easier, it's actually harder as you get older. Because when you're younger, it's just natural ways to meet people all the time. As you get older, you got to work harder for it. But I've learned how important it is. And it takes away none of my individual empowerment to say that when I move to a new city, I know how critical it is that I immediately set about finding relationships because those are what sustains me. But let me use a silly example. Like if I were to say, I'm going to empower you so much that you don't have to eat food if you don't want to. Well, you're still going to want to eat food, right? Because that's a basic human need. Similar with water and air and shelter and all those kind of things, right? And my claim to you is that the need we have for this connection is as basic a need. And when you are empowered as an individual, you're free to find food in whatever you want. Maybe you want to farm, maybe you want to gather, maybe you want to try some new farming technique. And this is the beauty of the free market, is you can try some new technique of farming that may be exponentially more successful or maybe not. But either way, you're free to try it out and see what works. And similarly, we're seeing that right now in this connection. Is Facebook the right way to connect to people? Is Instagram the right way to connect to people? How do we do that? Like, how do we have these meaningful connections? And the empowerment and freedom is to say, yeah, you can try these different ways, see if it works. Like, there's barriers. You, can, of course, can't be abusive while you're doing it. But in general, the empowerment isn't at all conflictory to the basic needs.
Hmm. It's interesting you mentioned social media because a sentiment that you often hear is, we're more connected than ever, yet more divided and more, or there's more, like a higher rate of loneliness than in any generation before us. So,
Because it's not a real connection.
hmm,
I'll use a much darker example that parallels this perfectly. And that's the rampant rise of pornography. It's, beautiful women are more available than ever. If you want a huge dopamine hit in your brain, like you can get that dopamine hit more reliably than ever. It shows so clearly you're more alone than ever. And the damage done by choosing the artificial is, I mean, this is, one of the reasons there's an epidemic right now of young men that are literally unable to be in bed successfully with young women because their brains are so damaged by online exposure that they only know how to get dopamine from the online version. And I think there's the danger, it's less extreme, but there's a danger of something similar happening with the social media where it's fast, it's dynamic, it's catchy, it gets your attention, it pops new things up all the time. It's even cool. The other day I saw some neat way to try to fix a piece of drywall hole, and given that I have 6 codes, I have more than one drywall hole here that I've got to fix. And so it was informative, right? But at the end of the day, it's no substitute for the real thing. And our deepest need isn't for the dopamine; it's for the connection.
Hmm. Can you explain that last part again? The need isn't for the dopamine, it's for the connection? Because, I
So
mean, one sort of feeds the other, I don't know, where is yeah.
It is true that connection can feed dopamine, but it actually feeds it less than the artificial things do.
Mhm,
I'll go back just because the pornography thing is just so easy an example and is so well documented scientifically what's happening inside the human brain that when you expose yourself to that, you get dopamine hits like mad. And for those
mhm,
who don't know, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is involved with pleasure. Because when you have dopamine released in your brain, it feels really good. It does. But the problem is because the connection piece isn't there, because it's just a bunch of pixels and not a real woman that you've made a real commitment to and shared your life with and intertwined your lives together. I believe it was Pope JP2 said that the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much, is that it shows too little. It doesn't show the real human being, and there's no real connection there behind it. And so your brain just on its own dopamine circuits are programmed to just seek more dopamine because it feels good. And that's a loop that just keeps running, keeps running, keeps running. But then you burn the ability to share yourself anymore because you're so abstracted in what your dopamine circuits will fire off of that maybe going to a movie with a real lady doesn't sound fun anymore. And so you go there and you're
mhm,
like, oh, okay, I'm here. I'm doing it. I'm at the movie. This is kind of lame. Maybe I should watch it online later on. This is still kind of lame because we've burned our dopamine circuits so badly, they don't know how to process the real thing. And whether it's just, maybe another example would be sugar. For most of time, we did not have any refined sugar. If you had a little bit of honey once a year, that was amazing. Otherwise, it was what you got in fruit. And now we have refined sugar. And you see with kids right now, there's a reason why there's sugar added to every single boxed food in existence. Asterisk, not quite, but virtually every. Because once you start getting used to having sugar added, that's what you want. Your dopamine circuits expect that large amount of sugar. But we all know that sugar is not a real nutritious component. Yeah, it's calories, but you're not going to have a healthy body if all you eat is a whole bunch of sugar. And there's exact parallels too. Like there's a deeper need that we have that isn't always super sexy and flashy and dopamine based. But when we pursue that deeper need over the shallow need, long term, this is analogous to what Jordan Peterson talks about assuming responsibility. It takes the bigger picture into perspective and always leads somewhere better.
hmm. And isn't there, the aspect of, well, of, say that you were going to go, uh, to the movies with a girl, like you were saying, to use your example. The idea in your head is better than the actual act oftentimes, right? And so, obviously, something like pornography could also, uh, it could happen this in the same way, right? Where the idea of sex is better than the actual way it happens in your life. And so then these artificial, dopamine hits in social media when you're scrolling through Instagram and all that, it's sort of similar to having just a very vivid idea in your head of what something's gonna be like, right? So it overstimulates even more than, so it's almost like the issue always existed, it's just been exacerbated because of social media.
Yes. Yes. One of the things we're kind of touching on here a little bit is, do you live in a world of facts or do you live in a world of stories? And we all want to say we live in a world of facts. We want to say, look, this is a pen I'm holding in my hand right now, right? Well, the reality is actually that's not the case. And if I'm going to go back to my engineering roots here for just a second. Imagine for a moment, if you will, the terabytes of data that come into your eyes every single moment that you're looking around. Okay, just terabytes upon terabytes, visual data, so much data comes in. Your brain cannot process all of that. And so literally there's entire circuits in your brain whose function is to throw most of that data away. And in fact, your understanding of what's happening around you is more based upon what your brain remembers happening than what actually is happening. And if you ever doubt this, the way to prove this is really simple. Just take your head and shake your head. It's like, do this for a little bit. Now take your phone, hit the record button and do that with your phone and see if your experience of what your brain perceives as reality looks like what the screen looks like when you shake it. And it doesn't, because your brain averages based on what it's seen. So the reality is, at the end of the day, I have this massive amount of data coming in, of which, by the way, is still a tiny subset of what the world contains in terms of actual data. And I throw almost all of that away. And what matters is the story that I create out of the teeny, teeny, tiny piece of data that I retain. That's the story that on which upon I base my life. And this is why it is entirely possible for you to look at something and see sequence A, somebody else to be watching the same thing and see a totally different sequence. And both of you are right. Because of the ridiculous terabytes of data available from that sequence, you chose a different 0.0001% of the data to keep than they did. And we need to understand this. Like, when we start talking about stories in our head and expectations, that the story in our head is more powerful for how you live your life than whatever the reality is. Because let's say I go to a movie with a girl, it's such a great example. That even the quote unquote reality of that could be radically different. If I really like her and I'm excited, ooh, I'm feeling dopamine, I'm happy, I'm excited. Oh yeah, I like this girl. I've been trying to date her for years. She finally said yes. Whereas if I'm like, oh, I'm only here because I made a bet with somebody that knows I'd actually take her on a date. So I'm trying to win the bet, but I actually don't really like her. Was this thing over yet? Like, there's a story that I'm just starting to fold in that literally transforms my experience in that moment of whether or not I enjoy going to the movie with this cute girl.
Hmm. And I'm sure in the version where you're less interested, she'll be more interested in you, right? As they say. But,
There's a funny flip there. But when we talk about attraction, the attraction equations are that's like a second order dynamic when you start talking about how
right, right.
attraction works.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just more so making a joke,
Yes.
but so what is some practical advice for somebody, let's say, like a simple thing that I was conversing with a mentor of mine yesterday was that say you go up to a coffee shop and you order a coffee, but you're like, oh, you know what? I had too much caffeine. I should probably get a tea. And
Mhm.
then you decide not to do it because you tell yourself a story of like, oh no, I'm probably bothering him, or he's had to deal with a lot of people. But so then when in reality it's like, 3 customers ago, it was a crazy homeless guy that made a big disaster, right? So it's like not even the he's not even worried about you, right? So what's the tactic that you can take to then, other than being obviously conscious of it, but is there something else that you can do, or is it just a muscle that you need to practice?
It's certainly must need to practice, but let me start with the perspective, because I think the story and the
Mhm,
perspective are so important. Start with the perspective that everyone is desperate for deep connections and
mhm,
simultaneously terrified of being hurt in the process of trying to find it. And there's this incredible tension present in all of our hearts. I need this thing so bad, yet I'm terrified of what's going to happen if I actually try to pursue it. So when you look at that from that perspective, my question to you is always, how can you approach the situation in a way that unlocks the terror? And I'll give you a magical bullet. The human smile is one of the most powerful things you can do that will sidestep some of the negative stories in people's heads. And here's a challenge that I'll give you and all the listeners. The next time you're in a situation feeling a little bit awkward, put on a big old smile and approach it with a little tiny bit of humor. Even if it's self-deprecating humor, that's okay. That'll still get the job done. Like, I'm such a klutz. I can't believe I forgot this thing. But, I don't know if you're even available, but could you maybe help me out for my own silliness here?
mhm,
And because we're smiling, because we're making levity of it, it unlocks some barriers to say, it's okay. I'm not going to stab you in the back if you get acknowledge a littlest bit of real connection with me here. But it also then gives them permission to say, like, maybe 5% deeper with this guy. Maybe it's okay to go 5% deeper connection. And he'll look you in the eye and say, yeah, dude, I can totally help you out. I've made that mistake
mhm,
too. You might say that, whatever. But that right there is me saying I have a problem and you saying I have that problem too. That's connection. It's still shallow. Like, this is not a deep, powerful friendship I want to encourage people to eventually work towards. But don't underestimate that bit of real connection right there. Because a little piece of your heart goes, oh, I'm not alone. And that is a powerful, powerful thing to start pulling on people's hearts with. And I encourage you, don't use this in the dark side of the force, because you can obviously use this to manipulate people as well. But this ability just to smile and to offer a safe little bit of connection can be very, very powerful. But the second piece of advice I have to put out there is, don't settle for that and ruthlessly look for friends that you will be willing to go deep with you.
mm. It made me think of that idea of your and I always flip the order here, but it's your thoughts create your feelings and your feelings create your reality, or your emotions
Yep.
create your reality, right? So like, you could be like you were saying, if because in reality, what you're doing by smiling, creating that connection is setting the tone for the conversation, right? And so then if you come at it worried that this other person is going to be angry, maybe they're in a great mood, but they're reading facial expressions on you, and then they're going to feel like, oh, something is wrong with this guy, right? So then they're going to become uncomfortable. So then, we don't
They'll
know
be more
how.
guarded.
Right, and so then created your own problem, which you could have avoided if had you not, um, you know, held that belief, right?
So true. I forget, I don't remember the statistics. Something like 90% of our problems are nowhere near as big of a problem as we actually think they are. And when we learn just to laugh at ourselves, not only do we unlock half the world's greatest jokes, but we also find the ability to just let go of all the stuff that gets in the way of what really matters.
Is this a real statistic or is this just one of those,
I don't know. I read it once something a little long ago, but it's so far abstract at this point in time. I'll say I made it up.
right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, I guess an idea that I love is that the majority of the problems like you said, yeah, the majority of your problems are within you. So then that means, okay, well, I have control of everything. And I feel like that's a big thing, especially among men. It's like feeling like they don't have any control of their lives, and it's definitely a sentiment that I had at one point in my life. So,
We all do.
um, yeah.
When you go back to again, going to the biblical text, go back to the story of Adam and Eve. Originally, Adam and Eve were made without sin. They had complete, perfect self control. They mess up, they lose that self control. What's their solution? Well, fine. If I can't control myself, at least I control you. And that's
Mm,
the way that so many of us try to live now. Is it's too scary, it's too dangerous, it's too overwhelming for me to look inside myself, control myself. So I'll try to control the outcome and control someone else.
mm. Is there, um, speaking of Adam and Eve and sort of that metaphorical apple, right? Is there something to be said there about? I guess I'll let you extrapolate there, but, like, is there is there something to be said there that, like, men need to be taking more responsibility and or is there a responsibility that we hold that maybe women don't?
So let's dive into that story because that's a phenomenal text, and there's so many layers there. Adam is created first, and to Adam is given headship of all of creation. And then God creates Eve out of Adam, out of this man, woman is created, right? And says you need to care for her. Well, and then the serpent comes in the garden, and so if you read carefully in the text, you'll read that while the serpent is talking to Eve, Adam is standing there. He's right next to her, and this is discussed a little bit later on there in chapter 3 that he was right next to her, he was with her the whole time. So what that means is that Adam is standing there as the serpent's trying to hoodwink his wife, and he says nothing. And any response would have been better. Anything from, hey, you loser, leave my wife alone, to, I don't know that this serpent has her best interest in heart, like anything at all. But he said nothing. In the typical male fashion, remember I said with the rocks, sometimes just like to sit there and just be rocks? He sat there and was a rock. And this is the time he needed to lean into his authenticity as male, to take responsibility, to say, I was made the guy who has to answer to God for why this garden has problems. So I'm not don't want a problem. Serpent, take a hike. Get out of here.
Hmm.
But it says the reverse. When God comes in and confronts Adam, what does he say? This is so great. I love it. He manages in one sentence accuse everyone else but himself. Well, you see, God, it was the woman that you gave me. That was the problem. Not me. It was the woman and you. Because you gave her to me and it was her. You know what I mean? It's not
Mhm.
my fault at all. And obviously, they got kicked out of Eden for that. And in a real way, men today will get kicked out of wherever they think their Eden is if they refuse to take responsibility for what they've done.
And they're taking their women along with them, right? Because they're not providing, um, that need that they have for them.
Absolutely. And that's not some statement of like patriarch or anything. That's just a metaphysical
Mhm.
truth. And we see that played out in the statistical data for population analysis at large. Just look at what happens to families when dad's gone. Like the damage done by dad being gone is so clear and so repeated across multiple study after study after study. Like this isn't just some abstract ancient Christian religious ideal. This is just metaphysical truth that when you split up the nature of marriage, when men refuse to take responsibility, real harm is done to all parties.
And so is there something that women can help men with? Is there a way that they, like, because I sort of want to give a perspective. I don't want to make this. entire hour about how, how guys can do a better job, but is there something that women can do to help the men in their lives?
I think a really big example is encouragement. I think I would invite all women to realize that men right now have a really hard spot we're in a funny way. Like that's you could say, oh, we got the cushiest job ever. We really don't even have to work half the time. But the spot we have in a hard way right now is we're trapped between the societal message about men, but the yearnings of our heart. And a lot of men on some level understand the yearnings of their wife, their woman, whatever the relationship is, to lead, but they don't know how because they have no role model. And what this really means at a practical level is they're going to mess it up a lot. And it's so hard because the natural woman response is to point towards the good, but that can also be overdone. And if we point to the good by saying, well, you failed the good here, you failed the good here, you failed the good here, you messed up here, you messed up here, and you certainly didn't do anything good in this particular situation over here. Instead, realize, hey, this guy, he's kind of like an invalid, he's kind of crippled, he's kind of handicapped maybe. And then, like, I'm not trying to be mean, but let's be honest, none of us came into this with great role models anymore. And what women can do is encourage. And when you see that right step, it's not full, it's not complete, it's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. Hey, honey, I saw that thing. Thank you for doing that. I know you're trying hard for us. It's very little.
Appreciation.
I heard once there's an easy way to tell if someone needs encouragement if they're still breathing. If they've stopped breathing, don't bother.
And this is men and women, right? I mean, this is
Yes, this is both. This is both. This is
yeah, yeah.
everyone.
Hmm. Encouragement. So then, I mean, we can all just walk through life giving each other encouragement, and that creates a sense of community, and then that fosters more of what we're looking for, right? So
Yep. It's hard though.
one step at a time, right? One single action changes incrementally, or what's that saying? Where if you do everything, you just need to take that one step. So and then the combination of them all creates the outcome that you're looking for. So yeah.
That's the key. 1% at a time.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you for coming on, and this is a great conversation. I'm sure we could have talked for another few hours, but but yeah, thanks so much for coming on. So
It was a
hopefully we
pleasure.
can stay
I
in touch.
absolutely, my door's always open. I really enjoyed our conversation as well.
Awesome.